Okay, so now we are going to go back over the concept of something called consumer surplus. And so this is based on something called the demand. It's part of the demand and supply model. Analyze what we call welfare, and in particular, consumer surplus is going to be analyzing what we call consumer welfare. So I'm going to draw this demand curve, and I'm going to write something called a demand schedule. It's our demand schedule. A demand schedule tells us a particular price. What's the quantity that's going to be demanded? So let's imagine that the price of a textbook is $200. And suppose that price is beyond 200, nobody would actually buy. And one student willing to pay $200. Our second student is willing to pay $170. So a total of 2 students would actually buy the textbook if it were $170. And then price of 100, let's assume 4 additional students would buy. Okay? So the consumer surplus in this scenario, this is our demand schedule. This is our demand schedule. It's really just a table telling us the prices and the matching quantity demanded, or the amounts that people are willing to buy. I suppose we were going to draw this to represent the value, right? So the price is the value to the consumer. Another way to say that is the benefit. And if we look at the benefit of each additional textbook, and we're going to call it the marginal benefit. So the demand curve shows the marginal benefit, and we're going to call that the marginal private benefits, the benefit to the student who buys the book. So on the vertical axis, we have our price. I'm going to have the units here. And what I want to show here, before we can get to consumer surplus, we kind of define it before we continue. It's the difference between the value of the product to the consumer and the price they actually pay. And so I'm going to refer to it often as the net benefit to the consumer of consumer buying the product. So I draw this. Here we have 0, 1. What I want to start to do is I want to represent the consumer surplus as an area on the graph. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to represent the actual value. And so let me put, we have 6 units. And I'm going to do this not as I've done elsewhere using linear demand. I'm going to use a demand curve, but we're going to do the first one. This is 100. And this is 200. So I'm going to draw the demand, a line at 200. And go down. Only one person is going to pay 200. And so what this area is going to represent, this bar, if I only look at that QD of 1, this is going to, this area, price times the quantity of 1. It's going to represent an area that represents the value to the consumer. And if I want the value at to the society of this product to the first and second consumer, I'm going to go across, we are at 170, draw a line. And the area of this rectangle here, we call that rectangle A. The area of A is 200 times 1. And the second consumer, the second student valued the textbook 170. That was the maximum that he or she was willing to pay. And we've got 4. Let's go back and select my pen here. I've got 4 people. So the third one is valued 100. The fourth one is valued $100. The 5th book, and so is the 6th book. Okay. So the value, and let's actually label these with different letters. What's the total value of the 6 of the textbooks to the 6 students? It's area A. It's going to be the sum of the areas A, B, C, D, E, and F. And these are a bunch of rectangles, but it's the area. I want to kind of highlight, it's the area. It's my favorite color, purple here. It's the area under. This is now our demand curve. It's going to be a stepwise demand curve. So a demand curve, and assume there's no other students willing to pay for the textbook. So demand 0. The value is 0 for anyone else. Okay, and so we add up this area. Area A is 200. Right, that's 2 times 1. This area is 170 times 1. And this is 100 times 4, this rectangle here, right? So all of this in purple is the value, okay? So the total benefit is the sum of the willingness to pay, not the actual price, but what they're willing, I should say, willingness and ability. All right. And so it's the consumer surplus. We have to look at, we have to know what price is actually paid. Let's say the text costs $50. And so let me change, let me put that in red. I'm now going to show the cost of the textbook. The cost of the textbook is going to be the, let's label my $50 here. Somehow my pen is not coming up. Yeah, there we go. $50. So what's the total cost of 6 textbooks? Based on this, the quantity 6 times 5, it's literally this rectangle here, right? So this area, the area below the price as a horizontal line times the quantity, this rectangle, this is the cost to the students, or consumers in the case of the textbook market. So what's the consumer surplus? See what the brightest color. Yeah, let's do this maroon color. The surplus is everything. Oh, that's, I need something that stands out a little bit more. Let's use black. Everything below the demand curve, but above, let's see, hopefully not erasing too much here. Everything below the demand curve, but above the cost. We're calculating that. That will be our consumer surplus, okay? So it's the value that the consumer gets, the willingness to pay that they don't actually pay for. You can think of it as the total amount they're willing to pay minus the cost that they actually pay, okay? And so imagine you are literally going to the bookstore with cash. You walk in with the amount you're willing to pay, which is for the 4 last students, $100. You only pay $50. You walk out back with $50. So you walk out with the textbook and the money that you saved that you were willing to pay, okay? And so That is the idea of consumer surplus, but visually on the graph, and show how we normally do it. For simplicity of analyzing a lot of our policies, we assume, it's just going to allow us to do more, we assume a linear demand curve. And so we're going to effectively be doing the same thing we were just doing. Look at the price. Let's look at the price. So whatever the price is, say that this, I'm going to call this P1. I go over to the demand curve from my price axis. I go down to the quantity axis. So here's my quantity, right? So what's this area in purple here? This is just like our textbook example a while ago, the cost of Q1. And I should put the total cost of Q1 to consumers. And let's go to, it's the value, right? So the value to consumers is given by the demand curve. It's the value of Q1. It's everything. If I could add it up, it's everything below the demand curve. Imagine these are going up by 1 unit, and I'm literally just adding up everybody's individual. So this is the value here in red. Oops, it's not going beyond the Q1 here, but my ability to draw a straight line here. So it's below the demand curve up to Q1. So what's the consumer surplus? The consumer surplus, let's see how my yellow color does. It's everything below the demand curve, but above the price they pay. Or this area is what we say is the difference between the two areas. And we can calculate that because it is a triangle. We can calculate it using the formula half the base times the height. And the height is this point where the demand curve goes to 0, but above the price. So it's a difference between, I'm going to call this P max here. So the height would be P max minus P1. And it's my base. The base, or the horizontal distance, the bottom of the triangle there. It's just in this case, Q1. So we have to be careful whenever we're calculating consumer surplus. The area is not always going to be a triangle. The demand curve is not always going to be linear. And so we're looking at the area below the demand curve, which represents the value, but above the price, or the difference between the amount the customer is willing to pay and the actual price they pay. And we have to be very, very careful that if they don't actually buy the product, they can't get any surplus. We can make sure also to figure out, whenever we look at any policies, what's the actual quantity that consumers are able to buy. So we're going to save these and I'll pull them up. And we'll stop there.